Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Hyperborean Devil podcast. My name is Fox, I'll be your host. Today I'm going to be shamelessly exploiting your subconscious thirst for horrible, shadowy, and creepy things for a divine purpose. Somebody asked me a question this morning, and it set the wheels in my head turning. And as tends to happen when I think about something all day, it turns into a huge conspiratorial network that'd probably make decent fiction. Fortunately and unfortunately, however, what I'm going to be talking about today is not fiction. It's a matter of history, a glimpse into spiritual conditions, and an examination of highly important practical matters and the methods by which we address them. This is going to be a wild ride through the blackberry bramble that is my psyche. I would recommend thoroughly sealing the top of your cranium with the heaviest aluminum foil you can find, then securing the foil with a belt as tightly as your mother can pull it. You might have to spit and cuss and have to leave the house for a while, or you might laugh, or maybe both. You'll likely want to refuse to take this seriously. But if there's any single good thing you care about in this world, what's going to be said here today is of vast importance to you. A lot of this is going to make you mad. But if you are intellectually honest at all, you'll listen to it all. Without further ado, I'll get into my first player in the conspiracy. This would be the Knights Hospitallers. Here I've got an article on Wikipedia, which is every leftist's favorite online encyclopedia. The Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, say that 10 times fast, also known as the Order of St. John, Order of Hospitallers, Knights Hospitaller, Knights Hospitalier, or Hospitallers, was a medieval Catholic military order that became the modern sovereign military order of Malta, which remains a sovereign subject of international law, as well as the Protestant members of the Alliance of the Orders of St. John of Jerusalem. It was headquartered variously in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, on the island of Rhodes, and in Malta, and is now headquartered in Rome. Sorry folks. That first paragraph was basically put there to turn away every stupid person in the world from reading any further. All they really needed to say was that it was a Catholic military order. Next paragraph. The Hospitallers arose in the early 11th century, at the time of the Great Monastic Reformation, as a group of individuals associated with an Amalfiton hospital in the Muristan district of Jerusalem, dedicated to John the Baptist. Oh, all this bullshit. Why? Tell us what they did. And founded around 1023 by Gerard Thom to provide care for the sick, poor, or injured pilgrims, here's the important part, coming to the Holy Land. Some scholars, however, consider that the Amalfiton order and hospital were different from Gerard Thom's order and hospital, whatever that means, right? After the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099 during the First Crusade, the organization became a religious and military order under its own papal charter, charged with the care and defense of the Holy Land. Following the conquest of the Holy Land by Islamic forces, the Knights operated from Rhodes, over which they were sovereign, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, they're a Catholic military order, and they were charged with providing care for the sick, poor, or injured pilgrims coming to the Holy Land in the 11th century. That's the important part here. And the other important part is what they're leaving out, which should be in one of the first two paragraphs, is that this is where we get the name hospital, as you may have surmised, right? Now, a hospital is a great place to be if you got a few bullets in your ass, or broke a bone, fell out of a tree, flew off your bicycle into traffic, something like that. But other than that, you don't want to go to a hospital. You don't want to find yourself in a hospital. You would do well to do whatever it takes to keep you and your loved ones out of hospitals. And part of doing that is not listening to half the shit your doctor tells you. If you even go to a doctor. Because doctors, more often than not, will get you into circumstances that eventually lead you into the hospital. Doctor's main job is to prescribe drugs. And none of those drugs actually heal your body at all. And I know you can make the case for steroids, but those actually wreck your body at the same time. And I know that because I've taken them before. There's a reason why they don't call drugs medicine at the pharmacy. Why drugs aren't referred to as medicine in any professional sense is because it's illegal. Because a medicine causes your body to heal. A drug seems to just eliminate symptoms. So the doctor gives you antibiotics. The antibiotics screw up your gut. The doctor gives you steroids. The steroids screw up the rest of your hormones. And you keep doing things like that to your body, and you're going to be lucky if you don't eventually wind up in the hospital for something pretty serious. And I wouldn't say it's just so much that the drugs destroy your body, is that going to the doctor and getting the drugs and treating things in that manner promotes general recklessness as well. You know, I've been on job sites where I'll see guys doing plaster work on huge rooms. And the rooms have no ventilation going into or out of them. The doors are closed. And the guy is in there sanding, creating all this dust. I mean, so much dust that when I went through and swept it, you could fill coal shovels full of dust off the floor. And the guy's in there sanding. He's not wearing a mask at all. He won't even go get one of those paper masks. He won't tie a bandana around his face. I don't know if he's trying to look like a hard ass or what he's trying to do. But he's looking at silicosis. He's filling his lungs full of foreign particles that cannot easily be digested by his lungs or hacked up. And sure enough, he's coughing his ass off already. And I don't know how long he had already been in there, but he was hacking up already. His lungs were saturated with the shit. That guy's going to be looking at some really serious problems, and all that's unnecessary. Well, what leads to that kind of mentality? That someone would be so reckless with their health like that? Well, the guy's counting on that if he gets sick, he'll just go to the hospital and he'll get fixed. He won't have to spend 6 months to a year in bed hoping that his lungs will heal, that he won't eventually die of pneumonia, while his poor wife and kids tend to him, while the household is starving. In the days before modern civilization, if you did something stupid like that, it could be the end of your entire family. So you didn't do stupid stuff like that. So a hospital is generally a place where unfortunate and dumb people find themselves. In the grand scheme of things, they're forming a buffer for gross personal negligence in terms of one's health. And in that way, they also contribute to overpopulation, because in the natural scheme of things, the person who is too stupid to care for his own health, knowing that he would, be maimed or die or leave his family to starve, still went on course with whatever he was going to do, he would die, or his whole family would die, and that lineage would be discontinued. It would come to an end. It isn't like today, where people can do stupid things like spray weed killer all around their grandchildren, and then one of their grandchildren winds up with kidney failure and needs a transplant from somebody else. Okay, that's nonsense. And that's going on all over the place. And you could say that the kid is an innocent victim in that, and that kids are innocent victims of a lot of stupid things we do nowadays. But if nobody learns a hard lesson from it now, won't the kid just grow up to do the same thing that the adults are doing right now? So, look at the Knights Hospitallers, right? This Catholic military order. This was taking place during a time in Europe where there were brother holy wars. European brother against European brother, holy wars. And they're running around kicking each other's asses, killing each other by the hundreds of thousands or millions over different religious ideas for a religious system that came out of the Middle East. And here you find the Knights Hospitallers providing care for these, quote, pilgrims to the Holy Land. And I assume that if they're calling them pilgrims and not some other derogatory name, then they're probably in league with the church already. They're allies of the church. What a bunch of nonsense. They've gone and stomped out the pagans everywhere they can find them, minimized the number of natural healers that were available, and they're still running around kicking each other's asses over the Holy Scriptures or whatever it is. And now they're forming medical units. They formed a medical unit to save themselves from some of the damage that they themselves were inflicting. It just... Oh no, Fox, you don't know what you're talking about. They were defending us from the Muslims. Let me tell you something. The Prophet Muhammad, the pedophile Muhammad, got the Quran from the Archangel Gabriel. The Archangel Gabriel is Jewish. Islam is Jewish. Christianity is Jewish. Got it? It's all Judaism. So you can stop trying to form boundaries there where there are none. Okay? Christianity is Jewish. And that's the end of the story. There is no argument that you can make against that. If you're a Christian today, you cannot tell me that you would have Christianity were it not for the Catholic Church. And now that I've told you that about the Prophet Muhammad, you can't tell me that Islam wouldn't exist either. So the fact that the Catholics may have been defending Europe from Islam is irrelevant. Because the Arabs were a bunch of scattered pagan hordes before they had Islam, before they had any unifying doctrine to fall under, that you could get mass amounts of men to go to war behind and start conquesting from region to region. The Arabs would still be scattered pagan hordes were it not for the invention of Islam. And Islam could not have been invented without Judaism. Catholics chop baby peckers. They molest babies as newborns, just like the Jews do. And we know for a fact that the Islamic religion was founded by a pedophile, the Prophet Muhammad, who married his first wife at 6 years old, started screwing her at 9. So now, you see the Catholic Church basically falling apart, and Christianity and Catholicism are in decline in popularity in the USA, and certainly in Europe, where they always have been. So what do you see now? A lot of quote-unquote medical centers popping up that are like tiny hospitals, right? And more of the hospitals changing names so that they don't reflect anything having directly to do with the Catholic Church. Now, whether or not they still maintain legal Catholic affiliations, I don't know. That's not the point. The point is that they're not going out of their way to create hospitals under Catholic names anymore, under the names of Catholic saints or what have you. They're naming them other things. They're naming them corporate names and people's surnames and so on and so forth. And you can see the Catholic Church, the Vatican, taking a big step back from the hospital industry. Why is that? Well, what I see going on is that when they were running the hospitals and they were running all these charity operations, they were doing this thing that they've always done, in that they have to enforce their relevance to society. They don't have a natural and necessary role in society, so they have to create one, and they have to stay with it. This is how a lot of pagan customs and traditions of old Europe became Catholic. Halloween, Easter, Christmas, so on and so forth. Is that if the Vatican hadn't assimilated these and labeled them as Catholic, people would revert to their pagan traditions that they had been practicing for thousands of years. So they have to create and maintain an artificial relevance to society. Now the question I have, and I'm going to do some research on this, is in pagan societies, since we know they had advanced architecture, agriculture, metallurgy, so on and so forth, I wonder if they had medical centers where there were trained medical experts on hand to handle an emergency like they have now. And how proficient were they? It's something I have to look into. But I wouldn't doubt if they did have them. I've got another Wikipedia article here called History of Hospitals. And I'll mention some things from it, but I'm not going to go to this article for my research, because that is a mistake. I'm probably going to have to do some pretty good digging to find out about ancient pagan hospitals. Because even if there were a truth about it in here, I'd have to go somewhere else to vet it before I knew it was true anyway. Basically, when I use Wikipedia articles, I'm using them to demonstrate the absurdity of the argument pushed forth by the mainstream whatever that necessitated my taking a contrarian position to it, trying to form an alternative hypothesis on it. Anyway, reading from the article here. Early examples. In ancient cultures, religion and medicine were linked. The earliest documented institutions aiming to provide cures were ancient Egyptian temples. In ancient Greece, temples dedicated to the healer god Asclepius, known as Asclepia, ancient Greek, blah blah blah, functions as centers of medical advice, prognosis, and healing. At these shrines, patients would enter a dreamlike state of induced sleep known as enkoemesis, not unlike anesthesia, in which they either received guidance from the deity in a dream or were cured by surgery. It's interesting the way they phrase that. Asclepia provided carefully controlled spaces conducive to healing and fulfilled several of the requirements of institutions created for healing. Anyway, so there's the vague academic stab in the dark at ancient hospitals. And I'm going to move on to the next point in my conspiracy, which is the psychic aspect of the modern-day hospital. Now, I've never been to one of the old, reputedly haunted hospitals. I don't know what that would be like. I'm going to have to do that someday. That's why I'm talking about the psychic auras of modern hospitals, because this is an interesting aspect to someone with heightened sensibilities in this regard. basically, I can look at a hospital from the public roadway, and it is the most terrible feedback that I think I can get anywhere. I can honestly say that I've never been past a cemetery that felt nearly as nasty as a hospital does. The aura of the hospital is rife with pain and torment and spirits of flesh rot. Yes, spirits of flesh rot. Rotting flesh has a spirit to it. And the spirit of rotting flesh, I would say, is the major overtone in the feedback that I get just from looking at a hospital, let alone going in one, where I'll be really on edge and I don't want anybody touching me and I don't want to touch anything in there. You know, I don't know if you realize this, and this is where it's going to get kind of gross, but all that rotting flesh going on in there and all that disease and all those sick people breathing forms a residue on the walls and the ceiling and everything. Well, to put it this way, they don't come through there with a pressure washer with boiling water or disinfectant or whatever and blast those walls down and get in every crack and crevice. They just don't do that. I don't know if they ever wash the ceilings. I'm sure they don't wash every fixture and every rail and every bed and every surface. They just don't do it. Most of the place doesn't get cleaned. You know, nobody goes inside the vents and scrubs those out. So there's not a HEPA filter on each and every vent opening. It's just not happening. So the air is filled with disease in the spirit of rotting flesh. Now, in the ancient ways, you'd have incense resin, such as pine, copal, maybe even frankincense, and you'd burn that, and you'd smoke it out, and the smoke would form a residue on the inside of the walls. At the same time, killing all the microbes in the air once you got it good and smoked up. But the smoke would coat every surface as it came to settle, and it would form a residue across the entire surface, and it would be impossible for a microorganism to inhabit that surface for a good amount of time. They don't do that anymore. They don't do anything in terms of a complete purge of the air and the surfaces of the walls and the furniture and everything else in the hospital. If you have a compromised immune system, it is a great place to catch a new disease. It's a great place to get MRSA. It's a great place to get hepatitis. And so knowing this helps me to validate the information that I'm getting through my psychic vision when I read the aura of the hospital from all the way from the street. I know that the feeling that I'm getting from there is not just, oversensitivity or a personal bias toward hospitals and medical facilities. It's actually backed up by the fact that the place is a giant revolving door for sick people and dying people and people squirting blood all over the place that never fully gets cleaned out. They don't ever have in terms of spiritual cleaning, right? Consecration. They don't ever have a religious proceeding go up and down every hall in the hospital after they've censed it out, with potent incense smoke like they would have done in the old days. They don't have them walking up and weaving every hall in the hospital, going floor to floor and weaving them all, making sure that the place is thoroughly consecrated, ringing bells and hitting little cymbals and stuff like that. That's what they probably would have done in the old days. And they would have done that regularly, at least once a week or something like that. And they would have been constantly burning incense. If they couldn't get resin, they would burn some kind of plant. Or even wood. Anything but sterile, stagnant air. So, to those of us who are trying to enhance our psychic abilities and develop them, we want to constantly be looking for affirmations that the information we're getting psychically is backed up physically. This is in keeping with the Hermetic principle of as above, so below. That is a very important purpose that I'll talk about in another podcast. Developing occult vision is something that can take your entire lifetime, could take several lifetimes, right? The ability to see all facets of something aside from what conventional rationalism allows for. The ability to discover new tangents behind things, sort of like a police investigator would. I think he goes out and he tries to confirm his suspicions. That's exactly what we do. In a way, occultists and police investigators are one and the same. So, some of us may go on to develop an ability to see illness in the world or to see illness in someone's body, identify it. Some of us, for similar but different reasons, may want to learn to identify death in the world, identify death in people's bodies. Death is a force. Death is a factor. You could say everything has a death factor to it. For people, the death factor is proportional to the loss of purpose. So the life factor is proportional to purpose, having purpose. But I'm going to get into that later. What I'm talking about here is occult vision. And it's a very difficult thing to talk about. Much of what you're going to be able to see with your psychic senses can't be easily put into language. And when you try to put it into language, it's going to be joining together words that aren't exactly congruent with what you experienced. You're going to be speaking through symbols. But to put the concept of occult vision simply, go back to what I was saying about hospitals and what I see when I see the aura of them. Now, you can look at it from both sides. A scientist who goes in there and takes an air sample is going to find a number of different viruses in the air, a number of different bacteria, pathogens, that he could not find right outside the door of the hospital where sunlight strikes. He could find them in the hallway. So, the spirits, the creatures, the inhabitants of the realm of flesh rot are literally in the realm of the air in the hospital. And when someone like me with a developed psychic vision goes past the hospital and looks at it, gets a really bad feedback from it. It says, don't go in there. It's a danger. Which I can tell you, I don't get from very many places. In fact, I can say I've never gone past a house where I've gotten that, or a business, or even a church. Hospitals are the only place where I get that particular sensation. And so it's reasonable for me to say that my psychic vision is telling me the same thing that the scientist is affirming when he does an air quality test. It's giving me the same conclusion. The air is dirty, it's filled with germs. It's dangerous. Science is a lot of people don't associate it with occultism, but it is occultism. Science is trying to find things in dark places where they were previously concealed. Like, the entire pursuit of science is trying to discover something that no one else has discovered. If you're going to be a scientist, quote unquote, you're going to be researching and experimenting to try to uncover something in your life that nobody else has ever uncovered, because that'll earn you eternal notoriety in the scientific community. So the scientist in there doing the air sample, or the lab technician, right, is an occultist in that he's trying to gain information from the unseen realms. In the air, where the things he's looking for are too small for him to see with his eyeballs. When he goes into his lab, and he fires up the machine, or he fires up the computer, he begins the ritual, right? There's a ritual. Every time he does this, he goes through basically the same series of actions that he always does. So he does the ritual, and out comes the information. And in this case, me as the psychic and the scientist, with his occultism, we arrive at the same conclusion. So if you're just starting out in this and you're on pretty shaky legs about what exactly you're experiencing with psychic senses, I would recommend that you go at it pragmatically first, like this. Like when you're coming up to a construction site, they've got the orange cones out on the road, and you won't even get near those cones. And it's not because you think you'll get yelled at, and it's not because you're afraid you'll fall in the hole that's nowhere near the cones. It's because in your psychic vision, you realize that the entire area is fraught with danger of all different kinds. You don't just have the hole in the ground, and looks are deceiving when it comes to when you look around and you see all the construction workers relatively relaxed about what they're doing. Realize you have things up high, you have tanks of explosive gas, you have hydraulic systems that are charged and ready to go. Meaning, I don't know if you knew this, a little pinprick squirt of hydraulic oil out of a hydraulic hose can not only cut right through your body, but when it gets down under the flesh, you're screwed. If it hits you in the arm, you're probably going to lose your arm. Hit you in the hand, you're probably going to lose your hand. You're definitely going to have a huge, nasty scar, disfigurement, and loss of mobility in whatever was poked by the hydraulic oil. So the entire construction site is fraught with danger of all sorts. And you subconsciously realize that. And that's why you don't even get near the cone. When you walk your favorite trail in the woods, and some days you come to it and they aren't like other days, and you just don't feel well on the trail. Does it ever occur to you that somebody may have come down the trail before you and left a psychic residue and they were in an extremely bad mood? Or have you ever felt watched when you're out on one of those trails? One of those well-walked trails that apparently get a lot of traffic by people and their dogs. You feel watched? Well, realize there's this thing called camouflage, and there's this other thing called a scope or binoculars. And you can sit there, if you wanted to, you can sit there way off in the bush and peek with your binoculars or your scope and watch people. And if you don't think that there are weird people out there doing that, I've got news for you. So even for those of us who aren't actively pursuing the development of the psychic sensitivities, you can get a good idea of how they work in the everyday sense. But anyway, let's get back to bitching about the Catholics now. The Catholics have this thing called purgatory. And somebody had asked me earlier about necromancy. And while I was thinking about necromancy, the concept of Catholic purgatory came to my head. And I got this crazy idea. Now, we know that the Catholics were in no way, shape, or form divorced from magic and sorcery. We know that when they went around in the early days, killing the pagans, destroying their villages, and so on and so forth, and burning the old libraries, that there were a lot of things, a lot of books, a lot of scrolls, scripts, tomes, whatever, that they took from those sites, kept for themselves, and went to work deciphering. Although I don't think they ever could really decipher them. Not completely, at least. Partially. We'll get to that. Anyway, I think they got a hold of these things and attempted to harness the power behind them. And the crazy idea that I had about purgatory was that, okay, if you take the idea of creating a thought construct that you're going to use to do magical acts for you. It's like this autonomous creature that you create purely out of your mind that is supposed to do something. These fall into a few subclasses. One of them is an egregore. And an egregore is a thought construct that encompasses a large physical body of something or another. It could be a company or corporation. It could be a hospital. It could be a religion. The spirit of a collective body, I guess you could say, would be called an egregore. So I wonder if the Catholics deliberately created an egregore called purgatory. Because being the shrewd businessmen that they were, they realized that threatening people with hell would either get them to go to heaven or hell, and that they would lose all those who were almost good enough to go to heaven and wanted to go to heaven but weren't pure enough. So they created a place for them to be. And in the creation of a purgatory egregore, a realm, which is basically the body of the egregore, the giant throbbing, pulsing thorax of the huge celestial insect called purgatory, where all the devoured souls go, becomes a tappable resource instead of a loss, as they all scatter in the afterlife, going here and going there and not going into heaven or hell. You're probably asking yourself why I even believe in the existence of these places, if I'm not a Catholic or a Christian. As a magician, I recognize that anytime someone repeatedly wills for the existence of something, it's going to become real. Repeatedly, consistently, ritualistically willing for the existence of something will bring it into reality. Now, when it comes to that specific type of manifestation, you are willing it specifically for the afterlife, so it's not going to come right here. The same as, say, if you willed yourself to be in heaven right now, without dying, if you willed heaven to come down to earth for you, that would probably get you different results. But these realms will be created, I believe, as egregores, and people will actually wind up there. People's spirits will actually wind up there, instead of taking any number of other natural courses that they would have taken. I think that there's all sorts of routes you can go once you find yourself in the afterlife and you're still intact and haven't been just blown into oblivion and recycled. So I have to ask myself, is purgatory a Catholic necromantic work? Yeah, there is an entire field of magic called necromancy that's dedicated to the realms of the dead, wherever and whatever those realms are. Necromancy is the art of magically or psychically interacting with the forces of death and decay. Self-proclaimed necromancers will tell you that they often get diseases or other ailments in their bodies following practice of necromancy. Like a little piece of death becomes the trade-off and it goes in their body. So you see that kind of thing going on, right? So is it really too much of a stretch to think that the Catholics are doing necromantic sorcery when they create purgatory? And they tell you that all the middle people are going to wind up in purgatory? And if that's the case, could hell be a realm that they devised when they took the concept from Helheim? Is it a realm that they created that's meant for torturing their enemies? Sort of like they tortured them in those medieval torturing rooms that they invented, the likes of which were never seen by the world since that time? Is cursing someone to hell, like Catholics tend to do, actually some kind of spell that's meant to hijack and redirect their line of fate? Like if that person was unaware and they were kind of, dumb, so they find themselves in the afterlife and not having had the ability to dream up a course of action for themselves, the prevailing ones which the Catholics put on them takes place of it. And so the Catholics will them to hell, and since they have no greater will than the Catholics, do they wind up in hell then? And the only people who avoid it are the ones who deliberately threw off the curse, like Satanists tend to do. Like, if you're a serious Satanist, one of the first things you do is you break any ties through ritual with a Catholic or Christian upbringing. Sometimes you send off the archangels. Sometimes you do other things that signify your determination to distance yourself from that religion. And after you do that, then you get into the self-development aspect of it. But not until after that, because the benefits, if there are any, of Satanism or Luciferianism have to do with self-discovery and self-improvement, about making positivity of selfishness, which is a human trait, selfishness. Well, you're going to make the best out of it. If you're going to be selfish, you're at least not going to waste your time. But the Catholic and Christian doctrines basically tell you that you don't have the right to be yourself. You don't have the right to trust your own judgment or wisdom. You don't have the right to trust your heart. If you do, you're a fool. It says it right in the Bible. And so they take yourself away from you. And when you get into Satanism or Luciferianism, it's basically like a shove in the face of the Catholic authorities or the Christian authorities that were trying to subdue you. You shove them off, and then you begin the real work of self-development. You know what I'd really like to see is for people to start taking statements by other people seriously. Like, when you've got a Christian in front of you with a Bible, and in that Bible it says that to trust yourself, you're a fool, and they're holding that Bible up and telling you it's the authority. If you bring up that verse and you ask them to repeat it, and you say, do you agree with that? They say, I agree with that. Aren't they launching that statement at you? as a curse. They believe themselves to be a fool, and then they believe that book is applicable to everyone. So it's everyone's law. The Word of God applies to everyone. It's the only one in the world, and it's the only one you can trust, and if you don't trust it, so on and so forth. And to disagree with such a person is to be wrong. Is to be wrong. And there's no good outcome from it. That's what they're saying, folks. And that book that they got is just full of anti-human curses. It is the most anti-human book that was ever produced. It promotes all the bad things and prohibits all the good things. Matter of factly, that's what it does. And the entire time you're standing there arguing with someone over the validity of it, guess what the people high up in the church are doing? Guess what the people high up in your government are doing? They're doing sorcery and magic in secret. And they're bragging about it in public so that you know that they're doing sorcery. Although they never disclose a ritual or anything, the actual ritual or anything like that. They make it abundantly clear to you that that's what they're doing. And they shove subconsciously effective symbols in your face in the media all day long. So all these bigwigs, all these elites are doing magic of various sorts and kinds and traditions. And they've got in their possession magical works that used to belong to your pagan ancestors. And they have no idea how to really use them. And they misinterpret the messages in them, the existential messages in them, as if the whole thing's in their favor. And ultimately, we're going to see them become the laughingstock that they are. They already are. They're being exposed. Anyone like myself who's got half a brain and an internet connection and a will to do the research can find out exactly what they're doing. But, you know, there's like 9,000 secret orders. They have secret meetings. There's symbolism in your face everywhere you look. There's no place to hide from it. Can't get away from it. You've got gang stalking is a thing now. I know some people like to laugh at that, but you know, you can't really laugh at all the many different people that are claiming it. You've got mass surveillance taking place presently. You've got MK Ultra this and MK Ultra that. You've got UFO this and UFO that. You got Aleister Crowley claiming that his main servitor, his main ally, whatever it was, I forget what he called it, looked basically like a Roswell alien. You have that. Hundreds of thousands of children gone missing. You got child trafficking as a multi-million or billion-dollar trade. I mean, look, there are tons and tons of people doing high ceremonial magic. That's what all that's about, what I just described. All that is a byproduct of their high ceremonial magic, their perverted magic. There is a solution to it. Because you'll never hear me bitch about something that I don't have a solution to. That is not my game. I will work until I find a solution before I bitch about it. The solution is to become aware of it. So you can take care of yourself and your loved ones. And be prepared to publicly expose it to whatever degree it is harmful to you. And if you can get to a place where it does not affect you, I would recommend you do that. Self-sufficiency is key here. Stand for the truth. Whether you do magic or not, refuse to perpetuate dishonesty or do anything dishonest on anybody else's behalf, up to and including getting out of the federal tax system. If magic is your thing, the greatest magic act that you can perform on Earth is 1, to live a genuine life, and 2, to have children and to raise them properly. Those are the 2 greatest magical acts that you can perform on this earth. No accumulation of wealth or knowledge or anything else can take the place of that. You live a genuine life, and people will remember you, and people will talk about you, tell your story, and carry on the example that you were. People will use you to teach their children, to teach the future generations. That's the most important thing that we can do. We do not want 8 billion humans and 95% of them are shitty people. And that's how that happens. That's exactly how that happens. There's a natural cycle to health, fertility, life, and death. And it's nobody's business to try and interrupt that cycle, to try to interrupt natural mechanisms. If you do that, doing so will result in the most dire of consequences. And when I say the most dire of consequences, I mean 8 billion people, 95% of them are shitty, completely shitty, to themselves, to the people around them, to the environment. Okay, I'm not going to go on to claim anything that could be construed as racist and get this video taken off, but if you want to look at an important statistic, look at the ocean pollution is where most of it comes from. And I'll give you a hint, most of it doesn't come from the USA, most of it doesn't come from Europe. So, go look that up, figure out what that's about. And figure out that the problem with overpopulation in those regions is not simply that more people are going to be living in substandard conditions, completely divorced from a natural lifestyle. That's not the extent of the issue, is it? No, because they create a lot of litter and they dump it straight into the waterway that takes it to the ocean, which they know it's going to do that. It's not just about their children running around perpetually barefoot and stepping on, glass and pieces of metal into muddy streets with people shitting outside and everything else that goes with it. You know the deal. People collecting oil out of the rain gutter and using it to fry stuff up and sell to people. That kind of thing. It's not just about that. It's that wherever you have a population like that exist, they are an incredible source of litter. Because people just cannot leave them alone, leave them to their own, and refuse to give them any kind of plastic or anything else that doesn't easily biodegrade back into the soil. They insist on giving them modern things made of plastic, and where do those plastic things wind up? And these people never would have had it if it wasn't given to them, if it wasn't shipped right to their doorstep and given to them at a discount rate. So we have ourselves to blame for that. That's on us. The massive trash islands in the ocean, that's us shipping plastic goods to people that never would have had them to begin with if we hadn't interfered with their lives. And allowing them to throw it all in the river where it winds up in the ocean. Like I said, I never bitch about anything without proposing a solution. Here's the solution to that. Some country, I forget which one it was, has already got on the ball with this. You can gasify any kind of trash, anything that will burn. Not metal, obviously. Metal will self-ignite, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about anything organic that will burn. Wood, plastic, it doesn't matter. You can gasify it into crude oil. And then you can separate that crude oil down into finer viscosities. I have no idea what I'm talking about here. It's called gasification. And obviously I've never done it because I'm on a residential plot and it just would not be a good idea to do it. It would not be a good idea to do it here, but if you have some property, you can set up a gasifier, run it perfectly safely, and derive crude oil from trash. And there's one country that has chosen to do that. They've chosen to start hauling back out of their landfills and turning it into energy. So there's your solution to that. And I'll bet you that if we'd actually cared half a damn about those people or the environment, when we went in there to start quote-unquote improving their lifestyles, one of the first things we'd have done after water treatment and plumbing was installed a gasification system. And boom, you would never find trash in the river, I guarantee it. If they get a couple of coins in their hand every time they take a load of trash into the trash burning facility, you can bet there will be no trash laying around anywhere. It's just something that isn't done, and it's probably because certain people don't want it done that way. They want these people to be the destructive force that they are. Now, back to Catholic magic. I haven't completely milked that one out. Let's say all the high Catholics, over all the years, doing all the magic that they did, down to the prayer and every single ritual and ceremony that was ever done by the Catholics. Let's say that, sometime around the 17th or 18th century, it started massively coming into effect in the world, like in a huge way, and started revolutionizing the world, but not in ways that we're accustomed to thinking. Not in the technology sense of the word. What if, in their creation of this purgatory realm, by wishing and wishing and wishing for it, the purgatory realm was created, but it was created here on the earth. Now, I don't know about you, but when I sit out in public and I look at people, very few people are healthy and strong. They're all either too skinny or overweight, or if they're at the right weight, they have no muscle, right? Even if you look at your average high school football team, senior football team, right? To me, I don't see big dudes anymore. It used to be, the football team, there's at least a few big dudes on it. I mean, the one in this town, there aren't any big dudes on it. None. And in professional sports, you see people with a good deal of muscle, right? And I'm sure that their food and supplement bill runs into the tens of thousands per year. And that's about it. And then in society itself, you'll periodically see an overtly muscular person. But it's definitely not commonplace anymore. Could that be a result of the existence of a real purgatory realm of the dead that intersects with the one of the living? That the majority of people that walk around in the richest nation on earth, bear in mind, the most wealthy nation on earth, they're all mediocre in terms of being in shape? Could that be the result of that? What about all this toxicity in our food? And what about the soy? Are these things causes? Or are they byproducts? Is the cause a spiritual condition? Like, someone like me would say that it only makes sense that the cause is a spiritual condition. Someone like me believes that illness starts in the spirit, on the spirit level, and works its way to the physical. And to me, it's reasonable that all the toxicity in the food and the soy and this and that is actually a byproduct of a realm that's been made mediocre. That's been mixed with death, like you mix two colors of paint. And on top of that, how many people you see walking around that literally look like they're dead on feet? I see that all the time. In fact, if I go to a fast food restaurant and I sit there for a while, I don't eat the food there, but I can watch the people coming in and out, the people who frequent that place, and they all look like they're dead on feet. Right? They're walking around dead. And they all, for some reason, they know it's really bad food. It's terrible food to eat. They still go there anyway and eat it. As if it's the greatest tasting thing in the world and you can't possibly get anything better. I don't believe it's the addicting food. I think it's that they're spiritually conditioned to eat dead things, things that are thoroughly dead. and made as close to inorganic as possible. And by inorganic, I mean inorganic, not non-organic food. Because I don't believe in that whole bullshit, and I don't believe in non-organic versus organic food. All food is organic in nature. You have to put it through a lab process to make it inorganic. That's the way it is. If the food ain't processed through a lab, it's still organic, it's just toxic. And in all of history, we've never heard of anything like this going on, even though we've certainly had the capability to do it before. We've never seen agriculture so butchered as it is now as a practice. And so it makes me wonder if it's the result of all that magic done by all those Judeo-whatevers, right? It's impossible for me to consider the idea of magic and how simple it actually is to do and not think that all those people collectively didn't change the world as it is and didn't, say, bring realms of death right butted up close to this realm to where you can see the inhabitants of the realm of death walking around in this one. There's a guy named George Romero. He made a movie called Dawn of the Dead. And I quote, "When hell is full, the dead will walk the earth." Now, if you notice, zombies are a pretty big thing. So what's that about? And some people will say that when you're talking about zombies, it's symbolic of the mindless masses. Yeah, I mean, sort of. Well, what if it's deeper than that? You know, because when you're saying it's symbolic, you're implying that part of it doesn't match up with the idea that there are literal zombies running around and that they want to consume the flesh of the living. I think that to say that it's just the masses the way they are now, you know, in their mindless, sheepish state, it'd be better to use a term like golem or robot even. But an undead creature? They're not undead. What about them is undead? You know, in terms of the way you measure things, not the way I do. Because I do believe that things get up and walk out of the realm of death and into this one. Or that the realm of death intersects with this one and we see dead things walking around. Most people can't bring themselves to believe that something like that. But the longer I go on, the longer I see it as being the reality. I don't think it's possible that so much necromantic magic could have been done and not had such an effect, because like I mentioned before, if you look up the accounts of actual necromancers, they'll tell you that a byproduct of doing the necromantic work is that the necromancer himself gets traded off a little piece of death and it becomes part of his body. And it makes hermetic sense too. It makes sense in the spiritual medicinal sense in that illness is rooted in the spirit. Because the necromancer is driven toward working with the dead due to some fascination with death in his spirit. And he goes for that spiritually first. And then after a while, it will manifest in the flesh. But it's as if he gets traded off a little piece of death. So what I'm basically saying is you can't do necromantic work without bringing the realm of death closer. It's what it does. And here we've got the Catholics that have been railing on about this purgatory for who knows how long now. How many times the same thing has been repeated? How could it not have become real? And then here come the zombies, and all the zombie movies, and all the zombie comic books, and the whole zombie thing just takes off like free candy. becomes one of the most popular horror themes that there is, above vampires and above everything else. So, laugh at the magicians all you want, and equate us all to stage performers that do sleight of hand tricks or whatever you want, charlatans, frauds. Truth is, they're the smartest people in the world. We are the smartest people in the world. And we've run the church and Judaism forever. Magicians have run the church and Judaism forever. Judaism began as a polytheistic religion. It was pagan by your standards. Your Catholicism and your Christianity was pagan originally, right? You know, all these people going on and on about heaven and hell and being saved in Jesus and all this stuff. Meanwhile, who's calling all the shots in the world? Magicians. Sticking it in your face every chance they get. Everyone is subconsciously infatuated with all the darkest works that these people have come up with, from vampirism to ritual human sacrifice to sewing people's asses and mouths together. If people think this stuff just springs out of nowhere, if people just dream it up out of nothing, make movies and comic books out of it, you know, kind of like they believe that the first life sprang out of a primordial puddle that had no protein in it whatsoever. Protein randomly assembled itself and then started replicating in other proteins or whatever happened. It's just ludicrous. It's totally asinine. And it always sounds like I'm being more dark and gloomy than I actually am. What I'm trying to do, whenever I'm talking like this, is I'm bringing it to your attention so that if you actually do want to do something about improving your mood and improving your living conditions, the first thing to do is to realize that all this stuff is going on around you and that you don't want to be near it at all. You don't want to be affected by it. And every time you take notice of something and you consciously decide that you don't want to be affected by it, you create a subconscious filter for it. But you have to become aware of it first. It's like that ad block that you get for the browser. It'll always run upon things that don't get blocked by it. You hit block, it puts it in the list, and then it blocks it from then on. Your subconscious filter works the exact same way. Otherwise, your personal psychic sphere will always be polluted by these things. There you go. I gave you your problem and I gave you your solution. The old Hegelian dialectic there. And with that, I'm going to break this off. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Have a good evening.